The British TV show Top Gear is a huge hit and no stranger to controversy. This week in Argentina, the crew's presence started a near riot, and it all started over a license plate.
It was the show that turned car reviews into global spectacle, where roaring engines met reckless stunts, and motoring became must-see TV. Top Gear, under Jeremy Clarkson's lead, wasn't just about cars, it was a cultural force that defied expectations, smashed records, and courted trouble at every turn. But how does a powerhouse crumble seemingly overnight? What chain of moments led from peak success to a dramatic fall? And what incident behind closed doors triggered the final, irreversible shift? In this video, we break down the untold details, surprising decisions, and critical moments that sealed Top Gear's fate. Stick around, you'll want to hear what really went down when the cameras stopped rolling. How Top Gear became a global powerhouse. When Top Gear relaunched in 2002, it was not merely a continuation of the original 1977 motoring program. Under Jeremy Clarkson's lead, alongside executive producer Andy Willman, the reboot transformed what was once a straightforward car review show into a high-production, entertainment-driven phenomenon. The new format blended irreverent humor, cinematic visuals, and ambitious challenges. Clarkson's vision positioned cars not just as machines to be evaluated, but as vehicles for storytelling. His confident, often provocative persona helped redefine what an automotive show could be, bringing in viewers who might otherwise have no interest in cars. Within a few years, Top Gear evolved from a British motoring show into one of the BBC's most valuable global exports, drawing audiences from over 200 territories and inspiring international adaptations. A key element of Top Gear's explosive rise was the introduction of elaborate special episodes and outlandish challenges. Rather than limiting the show to studio-based reviews or technical comparisons, Clarkson and the team created ambitious narratives that followed the hosts on epic journeys across remote regions. Whether navigating the salt flats of Bolivia or attempting to cross Africa in unreliable used cars, these specials struck a chord worldwide. They offered viewers a mix of adventure, humor, and genuine unpredictability that few other shows delivered. The challenges tested not only the cars, but also the presenters themselves, revealing character dynamics that audiences found compelling. These elements transformed Top Gear into must-see television, with episodes becoming global events rather than niche programming. What set Top Gear apart at this time was the ability to integrate automobile culture with popular culture. Supercar reviews and test track lap times coexisted with comedic sketches, celebrity guests, and rude experiments. The show would equally enjoy discussing some engineering principles alongside demolishing things to appeal to a broad audience. It pulled in car buffs and casual spectators alike through that mix of technical insight and spectacle. With merchandise, DVDs, live events, and syndication deals, the show was turned into a global brand that brought in considerable revenue for the BBC. The sheer scale and audacious spirit of this production raised the bar for automotive television, leaving competitors grasping for air. However, as the show soared to even more accelerated fame, the pressure increased, expectations intensified, and risks grew as the production became bigger. Could such a complicated and personality-driven machine be expected to exist indefinitely? Even at the peak of the show, tension was beginning to develop. It would release upon further conflicts, which tested the very bounds of the show's success. Top Gear's rise was also fueled by its savvy use of modern media and global marketing. The team harnessed the power of the internet early, with viral clips, behind-the-scenes content, and interactive features that engaged fans beyond traditional broadcasts. Social media amplified the presenters' personas, and allowed the show to build an online community that fed anticipation for each episode. International tours, arena shows, and partnerships with brands further embedded Top Gear into global popular culture. The result was not just a TV program, but a multimedia juggernaut that reshaped how motoring entertainment could be packaged and consumed worldwide. What truly kept this high-octane machine running wasn't just fast cars, it was something far harder to engineer: the trio's chemistry. One of Top Gear's greatest strengths was the unique chemistry between its presenters, Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. Each brought a distinct personality that complemented the others. Clarkson played the loud, opinionated, and often provocative figure. Hammond balanced this with enthusiasm and a touch of vulnerability, while May served as the thoughtful, methodical counterweight. What made this dynamic work wasn't just their differences, but how these differences created natural friction that felt genuine rather than forced. Unlike many ensemble shows, the trio's interactions rarely seemed scripted when it came to their banter, allowing viewers to believe in the authenticity of their friendship and rivalry. The balance of these contrasting personalities helped attract a broad audience and kept the content engaging, regardless of the cars featured. Their rapport translated into a format that was about far more than cars. While automotive reviews remained a part of the program, the show increasingly revolved around the relationship between the three hosts. Viewers tuned in as much to see how Clarkson would needle May, or how Hammond might respond to being the butt of a joke as they did for the actual car content. This approach turned Top Gear into entertainment that could appeal to those with little interest in motoring. It became as much about the journey, the arguments, failures, and occasional teamwork as about reaching the destination. The unscripted feeling interactions gave the show a sense of unpredictability and fun that became central to its identity. The synergy among the trio aided in successfully carrying out some risky ideas that would have flopped in less amusing hosts. Complicated challenges that could easily have felt contrived turned into compelling challenges as a result of how the presenters reacted with and to each other. Whether they were in a far-flung location, stopping each other's vehicles from going, or fumbling their way through the task, nothing short of a mediocre idea. But even then, their interplay elevated it. Real tension and frustration, loyalty and humor. This bond made it very challenging for competitors or successors to repeat the formula. Although the bond between Clarkson, Hammond, and May was forged across years of unique working environments, ultimately, this chemistry became the cornerstone of Top Gear's international success. The show's concept could be duplicated, but no one could ever replace that very unique bond: Survivor. That human component was thus undoubtedly one of the reasons Top Gear became fantastic, and, in quite a natural course, wound up struggling after breaking that bond. It was this irreplaceable dynamic that turned every episode into an event and kept audiences coming back, no matter the premise. Without it, Top Gear was never quite the same, proving that the heart of the show was always the trio's bond, not just the cars they drove. Controversies that didn't sink the ship. As Top Gear grew into a global phenomenon, controversy followed the show almost as reliably as its audience. One of the earliest examples that really provoked ire internationally was back in 2011, when Clarkson, Hammond, and May poked fun at the Mexican-made Mastretta MXT. The comments were rife with stereotypes against Mexicans, from terms describing them as lazy and feckless to insults dedicated to Mexican food and culture. The reactions were immediate. The Mexican ambassador to the UK made an official complaint to the BBC, demanding an apology for comments that he referred to as offensive, xenophobic, and humiliating. Although it only aroused public anger for a while, it has been a clearer signal to say that the presenter's type of humor misfits the realms of contemporary sensibilities. More such trouble ensued during the Burma special in 2014. While they crossed a makeshift bridge, Clarkson referred to a man walking across as a slope, a derogatory term for people of East Asian descent. Viewers and advocacy groups condemned the remark. The UK media regulator Ofcom, however, ruled that the broadcast had breached the code by including racially offensive language. The BBC, however, accepted that this was regrettable and claimed that there was no ill intent behind it. Clarkson's defense regarding "it was a slur said accidentally or misunderstood" did little to silence critics, for indeed, they kept adding to the endless series of euphoric moments that the team's humor would stretch beyond the allowed limits, creating growing tension between a show acclaimed by many and the public image of the BBC. The most serious of threats in terms of physical ones was staged much later in 2014 during the shooting of a special called Patagonia in Argentina. It was said they carried a Porsche 928, which bore the license plate H982FKL, which would have resulted in many locals in an intentional reference to the 1982 Falklands War. The backlash was huge. The presenters and crew were chased out of Argentina by protesters, forcing them to run away, leaving the vehicles behind and escape to Chile. Of course, the BBC would continue to maintain that the license plate incident is accidental, but several spare plates found in the parked cars have increased suspicion even deeper. Psychodrama has made international headlines and put into perspective how so very unfortunate this team has become in testing the limits of making travel international. In fact, during such incidents of a very serious nature, the BBC used to back Clarkson and Top Gear. Such nastiness has been observed to follow a pattern repeated instances of highly offensive behavior, resulting in little to no consequence as long as the ratings maintain their high level. I wonder how much longer that strategy can last. When the BBC's patience wore thin. The 2013 incident that marked a turning point for the BBC's tolerance of Jeremy Clarkson stemmed from an unaired outtake that surfaced during production. While filming a segment comparing two cars, Clarkson used the children's rhyme Enny, Meenie, Minnie, Mo to choose between them. The problem arose from the fact that older versions of the rhyme contained a racial slur. In the outtake, Clarkson appeared to mumble a version that included the offensive word. Although the final broadcast replaced it with a non-offensive term, the leaked footage sparked outrage. Clarkson denied deliberately using the slur, stating that he tried multiple takes to avoid it and was mortified upon realizing one take might sound as though he had said it. He even shared an internal email where he asked for a safer alternative. But by then, the damage to his reputation had been done. This controversy forced the BBC to confront a reality it could no longer ignore. While Clarkson's humor had long tested boundaries, the incident involving a racial slur struck at the heart of the corporation's values. Senior management, aware of how previous controversies had eroded goodwill, issued Clarkson what was effectively a final warning. The message was clear. Further incidents would jeopardize his future with the BBC, no matter how valuable Top Gear was as a global brand. For the first time, there was a formal acknowledgement that Clarkson's behavior had crossed a line that couldn't simply be managed through PR damage control. The incident brought to light some deepest tensions within the organization. Reports at the time indicated a split amongst BBC executives and producers regarding how to deal with Clarkson's growing list of misdemeanors. Some saw him as irreplaceable, relevant to the success of the show, and worth an accommodation on the risks. Others were adamant that continued leniency undermined the standards of the broadcaster and risked reputational damage to it. The Enny, Meenie, Minnie, Mo incident cast that gulf into sharp relief and left Clarkson on increasingly unsteady ground. Ultimately, this episode set the tone for what was to follow. The BBC was losing its patience after years of controversies, and now it had a clear condition for its forbearance. Clarkson had been told in no uncertain terms that there were limits to what he could do and not do. The question now was, would he or could he change his conduct in time to avoid crossing the line? The Frackus with Oyene Thyman. The incident that ultimately ended Jeremy Clarkson's Top Gear career took place on the 4th of March 2015 at the Simonstone Hall Hotel in North Yorkshire after a day of filming. According to the BBC's internal investigation, Clarkson became furious when he learned that hot food was no longer available from the hotel kitchen. Frustration over the lack of a preferred meal escalated into a confrontation with Oyene Thyman, a producer on the show. The argument turned physical when Clarkson punched Thyman, causing swelling and bleeding to his lip. Witnesses reported that the physical altercation lasted about 30 seconds before another team member intervened. Thyman did not retaliate, but the incident left him shaken enough to seek treatment at a nearby hospital's accident and emergency department. What made the situation even more serious was the sustained verbal abuse that accompanied the attack. Reports confirmed that Clarkson directed a torrent of expletives and threats at Thyman, including remarks about his job security. The verbal tirade was loud enough to be heard by other guests in the hotel's dining room and in at least one bedroom. The incident did not end on the patio. Derogatory comments reportedly continued inside the hotel. Clarkson later admitted to senior BBC management that an altercation had taken place and attempted to apologize to Thyman through text messages, emails, and in person. However, the damage was already done, and the issue was formally escalated. The BBC on the 10th of March 2015 had suspended Clarkson temporarily pending the results of an official inquiry. Ken Macquarie, director of BBC Scotland, would lead such an inquiry and interview witnesses and others involved. His findings are clear. Thyman had been the victim of a mindless physical and verbal assault. He described a breach of the core values and standards of decency at the BBC. The case against Clarkson opened with the fact that he had been in an altercation, although some critics contended that they had put it down to stress and exhaustion. This episode left Thyman in considerable stress and feeling insecure about his job security, even though it was not of his doing. The fight was merely the end of the years of underground tension, and now it was a decision that the BBC could no longer postpone. For many, it was a simple, defining moment of just one instance of an irate outburst. For most, it defined the line that had finally been crossed, with inevitable consequences. Just when it seemed nothing could topple the show, one decision would change everything behind the scenes. Why Clarkson was let go. Following the internal investigation into the fracas at Simonstone Hall, the BBC reached a decision that many saw as both inevitable and historic. On 25 March 2015, Tony Hall, the BBC's Director General, announced that Clarkson's contract would not be renewed. The findings of the Macquarie report were clear. Clarkson had subjected Oyene Thyman to an unprovoked physical assault and sustained verbal abuse. Hall emphasized that the decision was not made lightly, noting Clarkson's immense contribution to Top Gear and the BBC over the years. However, Hall concluded that Clarkson's behavior had crossed a line that could not be ignored, regardless of his value to the corporation or the commercial success of the show. Hall's statement underlined the principles at stake. He described the incident as a breach of the standards of decency and respect expected of all BBC employees. The report had highlighted not just the violence of the attack, but also the prolonged nature of the verbal tirade that followed, which included threats to sack Thyman. Hall made clear that while Top Gear was an important program and Clarkson was a huge talent, no individual could be above the fundamental standards of conduct. The BBC, he said, could not have one rule for one and one rule for another dictated by rank, or public relations and commercial considerations. The controversy remained at its peak. The fans were furious and disappointed about the action by Top Gear and Clarkson. Some accused the BBC of being overly reactive, while others thought it was well overdue after such a lengthy trail of controversies during Clarkson's tenure. Within the BBC, it was considered a necessary overstepping into the field of the integrity of the broadcaster. The decision went across the international wires too, as Top Gear had become one of the BBC's most well-known and profitable brands. Immediate priority for the BBC was in getting through the fallout. The long-term challenge would indeed be how to rebuild Top Gear without its principal figure. The move to separate from Clarkson was finally on many fronts more than that one incident. Edged back to years of ongoing tensions, controversy, and internal discussion, it was the BBC's turning point excursion, a very rare instance for BBC, wherein standards would be seen to matter despite the commercials, actions that would probably lay the future of a flagship show into a major remodeling. The fallout for Clarkson, Hammond, and May. After the BBC announced it would not renew Jeremy Clarkson's contract, one of Clarkson's first moves was to attempt further apologies to Oyene Thyman. Reports indicated that Clarkson reached out via text, email, and direct contact in an effort to express regret. Later that year, Clarkson also made a public apology as part of an out-of-court settlement, acknowledging that Thyman had done nothing to provoke the attack and expressing remorse for the distress caused. While Clarkson supporters hoped these steps might soften public judgment, the apology came after the BBC's decision had been made and did not change the outcome for his role on Top Gear. For Richard Hammond and James May, the aftermath was equally significant. Both presenters were asked repeatedly by the media whether they would consider continuing Top Gear without Clarkson. Their responses were consistently cautious, but hinted at loyalty to their colleague. Hammond described feeling gutted about the end of the era, acknowledging the trio's bond and shared history. May, too, expressed disappointment at how events had unfolded and resisted speculation about staying on without Clarkson. He noted that the show worked because of their unique dynamic, implying that any continuation without all three would feel artificial. Behind the scenes, both reportedly declined formal offers to return as Top Gear hosts without Clarkson. Unlike departure from Hammond and May, however, this was also not a contractual requirement, but was intended to fuel some speculation that the trio acted as a package deal. This meant that their collective action could have effectively sounded the death knell for Top Gear as audiences knew it, as it also assumed endorsement for a pressurizing understanding that aside from individual talent, success would be drawn from the affinity created over the past 11+ years. The loyalty became the story, laced with the construct celebrated by fans who considered them inseparable. It consequently made the task ahead for the BBC in the relaunch of Top Gear more difficult. Here, an association of the show's identity would not be with Clarkson alone, but with the entire team. In the ensuing months, attention immediately turned to what the trio would do next. Their move to walk away from lucrative individual options after still choosing to stick together underlined the extent of their professional bond. Well, whatever it was that would come next, they were to face it as one unit. The BBC's struggle to rebuild Top Gear. In the aftermath of Clarkson, Hammond, and May's departure, the BBC faced the daunting task of rebuilding Top Gear. The show was too valuable to abandon, generating significant revenue and global recognition. However, the core challenge was clear: how to reformat a program so closely tied to the personalities who had defined it. The BBC attempted to move forward by introducing a new lineup, initially led by radio host Chris Evans and actor Matt LeBlanc. The hope was that combining a British media figure with an internationally recognized star would help bridge the gap left by the trio's exit and attract both loyal fans and new audiences. From the start, the reimagined Top Gear struggled to connect with viewers. The chemistry between Evans, LeBlanc, and their supporting hosts felt forced, lacking the natural rapport that had made the original trio so compelling. Critics noted that the show's tone felt uneven, swinging between attempts at humor and awkward attempts to recreate the old dynamic. Ratings reflected this uncertainty. In the UK, viewership numbers for the rebooted series dropped sharply compared to the final seasons featuring Clarkson, Hammond, and May. International interest also waned, as audiences around the world found the new format less engaging. The public and media reaction toward the new Top Gear was mixed at best. Some segments or stunts were praised, but the large majority of commentators considered the presenters' interactions too contrived to be real. Evans was criticized above all for an outrageous persona that stood in contrast to the original spirit of the series. He left after one season, saying that the team needed to find its own way, without the added pressure of being compared to the past. Meanwhile, Matt LeBlanc was around for several more seasons with various co-hosts, but the series never really became a cultural phenomenon again. Despite many attempts to refresh the formula with different hosts and minimal tweaks to the structure, the BBC's Top Gear reboot would always struggle under the weight of its predecessor. The absence of the trio's chemistry was just too great a hurdle. Top Gear was, for many viewers, a package of magic that disappeared with Clarkson, Hammond, and May. No combination of replacements could conjure any of that magic back. A new beginning at Amazon. After leaving Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May did not remain out of the spotlight for long. Within months, Amazon seized the opportunity to sign the trio to a major deal. Reports indicated that Amazon Prime Video offered a contract worth around £160 million, spanning 3 series of a new motoring show. The decision made strategic sense for Amazon. It acquired 3 proven global entertainers with a massive built-in fan base at a time when streaming platforms were competing fiercely for exclusive content. The move was also seen as a way for the trio to regain creative freedom without the restrictions and tensions they had faced at the BBC. The result was the Grand Tour, which premiered in 2016. From the outset, the show made clear that it aimed to preserve the spirit of Top Gear while taking advantage of its new home's flexibility. The format retained familiar elements, exotic locations, ambitious challenges, and a mix of car reviews and elaborate set pieces. The production values were even higher than before, with Amazon's budget allowing for grander stunts and more polished visuals. Crucially, the Grand Tour allowed Clarkson, Hammond, and May to lean further into their personalities and rapport, with fewer corporate constraints shaping their content. The reception of the Grand Tour was mostly positive, especially for the first series, and the fans appreciated the continuity in tone and style, with many saying it felt like a natural evolution of what the Top Gear would have been during its glory times. Interest also centered on how the trio would handle motoring entertainment without the interference from the BBC. Some of the critics would suggest that some of the jokes or segments appeared outdated at times, or even too much into self-indulgence, but the general consensus agreed that the chemistry among the trio was left intact. Almost instantly, the show became one of the flagship programs for Amazon and attracted millions of viewers worldwide. With time, the Grand Tour modified its format and turned away from working under the studio tent setup and concentrated more on special episodes and grand-scale adventures. thus working on the strengths of storytelling, travel, and high-production spectacle. While the Grand Tour wasn't free from criticism, it showed that the charm of the trio was hard to resist. After being freed from past controversies with the BBC, they found space to entertain on their terms, proving that their formula still works. The story doesn't end with a fresh start. What came next raised even bigger questions for the industry. The cost of controversy and talent management. The Top Gear saga leaves a lasting legacy that offers important lessons about the challenges of managing talent, especially when star power begins to collide with organizational values. The success of Clarkson, Hammond, and May showed how personality-driven content can become a global phenomenon, but it also revealed the risks of letting star status outweigh accountability. For years, Clarkson's behavior generated headlines and internal concern, yet the BBC largely tolerated it because of the show's financial and cultural importance. When that tolerance finally ran out, the fallout reshaped not just Top Gear, but the broader conversation about what organizations should expect from their most valuable talent. One key lesson is the danger of relying too heavily on a single personality or small group to carry a brand. Top Gear thrived in large part because of its presenters' chemistry, but that same reliance made the show vulnerable when things went wrong. The BBC's struggle to rebuild the program after their departure underscored how difficult it is to separate a successful format from the individuals who brought it to life. For other organizations, the Top Gear case raises a critical question. How do you safeguard a brand's future while ensuring that individual behavior doesn't undermine long-term success? One notable factor in which Clarkson's life after Top Gear exemplifies the dilemmas of whether platforms change without really solving issues of violations. The Grand Tour on Amazon had granted him more creative freedom, yet it did not dissuade him from drawing another public firestorm. To wit, an offensive column written by Clarkson in 2022 about Meghan Markle drew widespread outrage, public apologies, and deliberations about his future association with various newspapers. It made evident that the problems concerning Clarkson were not mere Top Gear things, but continued to reflect broader patterns that left continuing opportunities for criticism and reputational risks to any organization associated with him. Thus, the rise and fall of Top Gear illustrates a cautionary tale: how to balance the creative genius with basic standards of decency. In the end, even a media behemoth like the BBC was forced to sever ties with Clarkson to show that massive commercial success is no excuse for crossing certain moral and ethical boundaries. For the broadcasters and streamers, and all the other employees, this is a reminder that stardom is a double-edged sword. It can build an empire, but without clear parameters and accountability, may also bring it to the brink of collapse. The show's trajectory underscores the importance of leadership that values both innovation and integrity. When talent is given unchecked freedom, the consequences can reverberate far beyond one individual. In the long run, preserving public trust often outweighs preserving a single star's status. Ultimately, the legacy of Top Gear serves as both a blueprint for success and a warning about the costs of neglecting responsibility. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives like this. Don't forget to check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you there.